Thank you, everybody. I'll declare the briefing open at 6 o'clock. The City of Vincent would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome everyone to the briefing session this evening. We have the following members on approved leave of absence. We've got Mayor Emma Cole from the 17th of September 2018 to the 12th of October 2018, and Councillor Dan Loden is also on approved leave of absence from the 7th of October 2018 to the 13th of October 2018, and I have received apologies from Councillor Toppelberg. We will now move on to public question time and the receiving of public statements. This is a briefing session, so public questions and statements are limited to items on the agenda. We ask that you, when you come up to the microphone, you state your name, your address and the item that you're speaking on this evening.
Mayor, I've received one disclosure of interest affecting impartiality from Councillor Jonathan Hallett. It is in relation to item 6.1, proposed 40-kilometre area-wide speed zone trial results of community consultation. That interest being the fact that Councillor Hallett lives within the trial area. As a consequence, there may be a perception that Councillor Hallett's impartiality on the matter may be affected. Councillor Hallett has declared that he will consider the matter on its merits and vote accordingly at next week's council meeting.
Thank you. I've also just note that I've had apologies from Councillor Harley for this evening. I will use my discretion as the presiding member to go now to item 8.2 so that the members in the gallery who are interested in the item relating to the Kyalla Community Farmers Market, permit approval and waiver of fees, we can handle that one first. Do I have any questions from councillors in relation to that item? Okay, I just have one in terms of if through myself to the director of the acting director of development services, just in terms of community engagement, other farmers market leases or leaseholdings or licences to use ovals or public parks. What is the usual time frame associated with those if we're not going to provide a permanent approval?
I might answer that. That's okay, Deputy Mayor. I'm not actually aware that we have any permanent farmers markets per se using the city's public open spaces. We do have a number of other markets. An example would indeed be the hawkers markets at Mount Hawthorn. My recollection is that does not have an approval for the length of 5 years. I can certainly confirm that within the briefing notes. For the purposes of this report, the last permit approval was for a 5-year period, and given the community value of the event, administration proposes to provide a similar time frame, but we can certainly clarify whether there are any other markets and include that in the briefing notes.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now go back to the development services items on the agenda and just work through them in the order that they appear on the agenda. First up, we've got item 5.1, number 14, Orange Avenue, Perth, second storey addition and alterations to group dwelling. Do I have any questions from councillors? If I could just ask the Acting Director of Development Services to clarify exactly what's changed since the last application in relation to this property.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, since the last time it was presented to Council where it was refused, the height has been reduced from being a slight departure to the deemed to comply standards to now being compliant. Some additional landscaping within the front setback area and some cosmetic modifications in terms of colours and materials.
Thank you. Item 5.2, number 48, Agena Street, Mount Hawthorn, 2 grouped dwellings. Any questions? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Through you to the Acting Director of Development Services. One, just in terms of the report, in the detailed assessment table is the landscaping discretion doesn't seem to be included, so whether that can be fixed for the next report. Could Could you also confirm the criteria for development applications being referred to the design review panel and why this one wasn't at this time? And then in relation to the commentary from the public gallery around compliance of some other developments on the street, that whether you have some commentary on those.
Through Deputy Mayor, in terms of landscaping, that's not in the detailed assessment table because the provision hasn't been approved by the Planning Commission. As a general rule, we put a section in the report to explain Council's policy on the matter through the built form policy, but for the purpose of the detailed table, we only put in the actual operative provisions of the R codes and any departures actually approved by the Planning Commission. In terms of the DRP component, as a general rule, larger, more significant applications are referred to the design review panel where it's considered that there would be value in having that extra level of assessment in terms of design. I can provide through the briefing notes a more definitive explanation of what the thresholds are, if that suits. And what was the last question, sorry?
Just that there was a comment about compliance of other developments on the streets and whether you can comment on any of those and potentially just in the notes.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, staff can contact the submitters to seek which particular developments they're referring to, and staff can provide some comment through the briefing notes about the relative level of compliance.
Councillor Castle.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, question for the Acting Director. The first question, there was a lot of commentary in the public gallery about the garage setbacks and some seems to be some dissension on what the actual requirements are given the overhanging balconies. Can you just confirm what the deemed to comply is and how far away we are?
Through Deputy Mayor, yes, the R codes includes provisions regarding the permissible width of a garage door, which is generally 50% of the frontage. However, that is only applicable where the garage is located in front of or within 1 metre of the balance of the building. In this case, as I think it was referred to by the applicant, because the balconies protrude at least 1 metre beyond the garage, that provision doesn't apply.
And in following on from that, so what impact does the overhanging balcony have on the setback of the garage? Does that make that requirement more or less?
Through Deputy Mayor, that they are assessed independently. If you go to page... So if you go to page 36, there will be the reference to the front setback. Now, the front setback is calculated in this instance to the balcony because the balcony protrudes in front of the garage. So the minimum setback provided in this case is 4.5 metres for the northern dwelling and 4.4 for the southern dwelling, and that is taken to the balcony, which is the closest point to the street.
Just a few more questions. There was some discussion in the public gallery about the owners being open to more setback. And I note that there's obviously been some discussion following the consultation about changing the materials. In your view, is there scope for more changes to be made to these plans that might satisfy the concerns of the neighbours, or is there really, we're kind of dealing with an area that we can't go much further?
Through Deputy Mayor, there's always scope for further changes to plans, depending on the appetite of the applicant to exercise their right to amend their plans. If it was simply a case of simply pushing the dwellings further back into the site to achieve a greater front setback, that would do a number of things. It would reduce the outdoor living area at the rear of the site, reduce the deep soil zone and associated canopy cover, and effectively replace that at the front of the site with additional crossover. So that, from on balance, wouldn't be considered to be a preferred outcome, because you're simply increasing hard surface at the expense of deep soil area and canopy cover. If the applicant was open to making changes to the actual dwelling configuration size, we would certainly be open to looking at that as well, and that would really be the only way to address any potential landowner concerns without coming at the expense of deep soil area and canopy cover.
Anything further, Councillor Fataka?
Through you, Acting Mayor, to the Acting Director. It's just on the garages again, but in looking at the plans, I just want to really understand really the relevance of the proportion of the garages form on the front design. I mean, we're looking at over 80% of the front of those properties is consumed by garages, so I want to understand really where that fits within our approval process or rejection process.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, as before, in terms of the R-codes provision, because of the fact that the balconies protrudes forward of the garage, the R-codes doesn't actually set a restriction on it, presumably on the basis that because the garage is effectively recessed behind the front face of the balcony, it has a reduced impact on the streetscape. So as the applicant referred to previously, it is simply not a matter relevant to Council's consideration.
Anything further, Councillor Fotakis? I just have two questions. Is it possible to obtain estimates in relation to the individual street setbacks for the properties on Agena Street that have been used in the calculation? And also from the gallery there was, and in the report it does talk about that there are properties on the street that have a setback in alignment with the dwellings that are proposed. Is it possible to identify the proximity of those dwellings to the dwelling under consideration, and also just a query in relation to the reduced setbacks and whether they impact in overshadowing in any manner?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, in terms of the first component, we can certainly provide for the briefing notes and the Council report perhaps more information on the setbacks that have been used to produce the deemed to comply standard, and also any other relevant setbacks in the local area. In terms of the visual privacy and solar access, both those elements do comply with the deemed to comply provisions, but further information in terms of the manner in which it complies can be provided to the briefing notes as well.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to number 5216 Stirling Street, Perth, amendment to approval for change of use from office to shop. Do I have any questions? I've totally missed... Oh, 5.3. Yes, that's it. Did you have any questions, Councillor Murphy?
I did want to put forward a alternate for just a payment of one car bay. We could work up something with you, Luke, if I could, during the week. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Does any other councillors have any questions in relation to this item? No. Just a question in relation to the provision of bicycle parking on site or in proximity. I understand from conversation with the applicant that there may be scope for a bike bay to be provided, or bicycle parking to be provided at the rear, and then also whether there was a previously approved parking shortfall or cash in lieu paid for approved parking shortfall for the former office use of the site.
Through Deputy Mayor, administration has reviewed that second matter and there was no previous shortfall or cash in lieu equivalent. In terms of, but that said, the approval for that site was granted under a previous policy setting of council. where reduction factors would have been applicable. In terms of the bicycle bays, that it would be open to council to either with the recommendation or the alternative recommendation to impose another element, being the provision of bicycle bays if council so wished.
Thank you. And what would the parking requirement be if the site was retained as an office and assessed under the current policy framework?
Through Deputy Mayor, if there was no change of use, it wouldn't have triggered an application for development approval. But in any event, staff could do a hypothetical assessment of what would have been applicable.
Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing further, we'll move on to item 5.4, number 33 Church Street, Perth, proposed amendment to conditions of approval, office and unlisted use community service. Do I have any questions in relation to this item? That's a no. We'll move on to item 5.5, number 8 Moy Street, Perth, change of use from single house to unlisted use short-term dwelling, unauthorised existing development. Do I have any questions? Councillor Castle.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. My first question for the Acting Director. This has been operating since November 2007, is that correct? And in that time, have there been any complaints? Maybe 17 is what I should have written down.
Through Deputy Mayor.
Formal complaints, I mean.
Through Deputy Mayor, we've been made aware from the applicant that they commenced operating in about November last year. The application wasn't actually received until late January this year. With no complaints received, administration was unaware that the unauthorised development was actually taking place. So, based on what the applicant has told us, we understand that the use actually commenced without approval in November last year.
And so the city's not had any complaints either since November or since January about the use?
Through Deputy Mayor, not until we advertised the current application for development approval. That application, or that consultation process, drew objections, which is evident from the gallery tonight and from the report.
And a further question, there was reference from the public gallery about the applicant being ordered to cease operating and not in fact doing so. Do you have any comment on that or any evidence?
Through Deputy Mayor, I'll check that and report back through the briefing notes and the report.
My final question is, during this process, have you considered imposing a minimum night stay on this property? It's something that we've looked at in similar situations, and whether that might go some way to reducing the number of parties that appear to be happening.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, the applicant hasn't proposed a minimum night stay, nor is one essentially required under the temporary accommodation policy. Staff have adopted the view previously for other applications that so long as the management practices are appropriate and adhered to, a minimum night stay is not necessarily helpful, because the management regime should be delivering the appropriate result. It would be open to council, however, if council was to approve the application, to impose whatever parameters it sees fit, which could include a minimum night stay at any given time or as it applies over the weekends, if that's the area of concern.
Anything further? Councillor Hallett.
Just in relation to the management plans, what capacity does a management plan have to control the type of customers that use the accommodation, and is there capacity to require 24-hour responses?
Through Deputy Mayor, it would be reasonably impractical to have administration vet or otherwise control who is going to be using the premises. But as we've seen from other applications of a similar nature, it may in some cases be appropriate to require an enhanced level of management, which could require, depending on the nature of the use proposed, security patrols, walkthroughs, contact details, CCTV, which are just a number of examples which have been raised for other similar applications. So it would absolutely be within Council's power to impose conditions to that effect.
In the briefing notes, is it possible to get some detail on where other short-term accommodations have been approved in residential-only areas? And just in relation to a comment from the gallery around our temporary accommodation policy and requiring reviews of building codes, can you just comment on what would that entail in terms of this premises?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I'll review the policy and provide an update for the briefing notes and update the report accordingly.
And just lastly, I was wondering if you could comment on amenity and the impact of noise and, I guess, excessive parking and how that intersects with a heritage area that might have some additional sensitivities.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, we note that the area is a heritage area, and that's acknowledged in the report. The application is simply for a change of use as opposed to any physical development. The subject site accommodates one bay already. I know a comment was made about, I suppose, a potential desire to remove that bay at some point in the future. However, the bay legally exists and it wouldn't be open to Council to require it to be removed. In terms of the amenity impacts of the area, it is a reasonably compact urban form, I think it would be fair to say. But again, going back to the previous comment about the management plan, the management plan is considered by administration to be quite sound and would appropriately deal with any potential noise or amenity or activity or scale and degree impacts. However, that is contingent on it being appropriately administered. And if Council was to approve the application with a management plan of any description, it would effectively become a responsive compliance action for administration to make sure it's being adhered to at all times.
Anything further? Councillor Patakis.
Just through you, Deputy Mayor, or Acting Mayor, sorry, through to the Acting Director again. It's very busy for you tonight, Luke. Just some understanding on a couple of points that were raised by the gallery. There was a reference to the Brookman Street guidelines, and those guidelines being having some relevance to the approvals that we're looking at tonight, particularly with the use of properties in that area. So I just want to really get some understanding on that. The other issue relates to the upkeep of the property. So obviously the owner is applying to actually embark on a commercial process. He's already undertaking the rent of the property at an increased rent amount. But obviously from some of the concerns raised by residents that there's a failure on the owner for the upkeep of the property. So within that management plan or any other stipulations, I mean, do we have the ability to really to be able to condition that property come up to an acceptable standard, both in terms of a rectification of any problems and the maintenance of the property as well?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, given that the application is fundamentally for a change of use, it may not be appropriate to impose conditions that would basically require the landowner to undertake physical development or improvements to the site. That said, through the briefing notes, I can and the report, if necessary, provide an update or provide some information as to how the guidelines impact the site, because it may well be that the guidelines are a more appropriate tool to enforce compliance of a certain development standard, whereas using a change of use application to deliver built form and physical changes may not be the most appropriate measure. But I'll provide some information on the guidelines to the briefing notes.
Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, just on complaints, I'm wondering if there's any way the city could obtain any records on police call-outs or anything to this address. just to ascertain if residents aren't complaining to the city, if there's been any complaints or to the police at all. Is that possible?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, staff can certainly make those inquiries and report back to the briefing notes.
Thanks. I'd be interested for the last 12 months. Thanks.
Anything further? Okay. I have a couple. Does cash in lieu or the parking shortfall apply for this sort of an application?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, it could. The fact that 2 bays are required and 1 bay is provided, it would be open to council to equalise that shortfall with a cash contribution. Administration wouldn't recommend that approach on the basis that the single house currently and lawfully has 1 bay, and it may council would need to consider the appropriateness of requiring a higher or a greater number of bays for a short-term accommodation relative to an existing single house. But it would certainly be open to council to consider that.
And have any residential parking permits that were issued to the premises been cancelled now that we know it's not operating as a residence but a short-term accommodation?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, we'll take that on notice. We can certainly easily confirm that and include that information in the briefing notes.
Would the parking requirement reduce if the number of guests were reduced from 6 to 2?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, no, that it is based on the actual dwelling. If I could, sorry.
Yes.
Although it would be open to council to make a judgment call as to the practicalities of what the parking demand would be if it was limited to 2 people per stay.
Could a condition be added requiring advertising and promotional materials to clearly state that only 1 car bay is available on site for free and that otherwise parking would not be included in the price of the accommodation?
Through Deputy Mayor, yes, the management plan already makes reference to the parking situation, but it would be certainly open to council to strengthen that provision. The
applicant has said they would install a sound monitoring device. Has the city undertaken any investigation into the efficacy of these devices, and if it was shown that they are suitable at advising property managers, etc., when noise is approaching suitable limits, could the installation of these sorts of devices be conditioned if the application was approved?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, the city is satisfied with the bona fides of noise monitoring devices. The city themselves owns and uses them for checking compliance with the noise regulations. A condition could be structured to tie the noise performance of the development to an ongoing approval, or could also be open to council to grant a time-limited approval, in which case, after a given period of time, the approval would expire, and it would be open to the applicant to lodge a new application for development approval, producing, you'd imagine, the results of the noise monitoring that had taken place during the initial phase of the approval.
Okay, thank you. And I just probably should flag that I'd like to request an alternative be prepared for this item. Okay, if there's nothing further, Councillor Hallett.
Sorry, and just to follow up with the request for more information about complaints, is it possible to get any information from the property manager of anything that's been reported to them?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, yes.
Okay, thank you. Item 5.6, number 162, Oxford Street, Leederville, amendment to approval for hours of operation and patron numbers for small bar. Councillor Hallett.
Just wondering about it didn't look like there was anything about Sundays before public holidays having a separate time. So just wondering about the consistency with the way that we've been approving a bunch of others, including another one that's on the agenda tonight.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, yes, the applicant has not sought to have different hours from a Sunday to a public holiday, although I note for Sundays generally they are only seeking to operate to 10 p.m, but it would be open to have a different standard if there is a public holiday the next day, although the applicant hasn't sought to have any increased hours in that regard.
Councillor Hallett.
And just in attachment 2, which is the previous minutes for the approval, there may well be a reason for this, but just wondering that it looks like it's an unconfirmed version and there's a lot of blanks in it, including almost like a reduction of the people who voted for and against the motion. Just wondering why that was.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I believe the replacement pages resolved that issue, but I think it was a technical matter that we've resolved.
Anything further, Councillor Hallett? Any questions? No. Okay, item 5.7, number 559, Beaufort Street, Mount Lawley, change of use from shop to unlisted use small bar, amendment to approved conditions. Do I have any questions? No. Okay. Item 5.8, integrated transport plan, appointment of a successful tenderer. Councillor Loden isn't here, so does anyone else have any questions? Okay, we'll move on. Now, hold on, I need to move to my different agenda. Let's move to our item 5.9, late report, relocation of the Leederville Town Centre taxi zone. Do I have any questions? Oh, I had one on this one. Just in relation to whether there was any limitations on the extent of the approvals that can be issued via the online alfresco approval system as per the city's policy.
Through Deputy Mayor, administration are actually investigating that at the moment, and it may well be that the way the online portal has been structured, there are some limiting factors where it is not a typical alfresco situation, so staff are investigating that and will amend the report as necessary.
Thank you. Okay, so 5.10 late report, amendment number 2 to local planning scheme number 2. Do I have any questions?
I'm sorry, I am having trouble locating these late reports. Can you tell me where they are?
So still under docs on tap for the briefing agenda, late council briefing agenda 9 October 2018. Councillors, any questions? No. I just had a question in relation to the process from here and what the timelines for approval would be in relation to a basic amendment and any discussions or advice in relation to whether the proposal is likely to be considered a basic amendment.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, if it is considered a basic amendment, it is quite possible that it could be resolved by the end of November or at some point in November or December. If it is a standard amendment that requires a normal advertising process, that will be well into 2019 and will require a second round of consideration by Council. Administration have had some initial discussions with department staff regarding this issue and if council resolves as recommended, staff will be meeting with potentially the chairman of the Planning Commission or other senior staff to advocate for our position that it is a basic amendment.
Thank you. Nothing further? Okay, we'll move. I think we're done with development services. We'll move on to engineering reports. Item 6.1, late report, proposed 40km/h area-wide speed zone trial, results of consultation. Do I have any questions? Item 6.2, late report, monthly minor parking improvements and amendments for consideration. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to come over here again. Just in relation to, I think it might have been the first one, what assessment has been undertaken, in relation to determine the need for the 3-hour proposed parking restrictions? Has an assessment been undertaken of the percentage parking in the streets under question?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. It was an informal assessment, so it's not a formal scientific assessment in that respect. It's just been noted by officers that the area's very full constantly, so that's the reason for the report, but there is no formal data, if you like.
And what would the process be to gather some formal data? I mean, recognising that perhaps formal data may be reasonably informal, but to perhaps, I guess, often fully occupied is reasonably loose, whether there is any opportunity to perhaps some observation to determine whether often is 40% of the time, whether the occupation is 100% of the time, as per the parking framework that we've assessed other applications under.
Deputy Mayor, yeah, that's correct. We could do some more formal scheduled visits and record those visits and actually have the data on the percentages of occupation. We could do that.
And just in relation to whether any consultation has undertaken with the residents of Robinson Avenue and Brisbane Place in relation to the restrictions proposed?
Deputy Mayor, no, there hasn't been any formal consultation.
And whether the embedded bay on Bulwer Street impacts the bike lane at all for the motorcycle bay?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. No, it doesn't. We take a section of the footpath and just cut into the footpath.
And also, we've previously had discussions about some other streets for parking amendments. Are these likely to be forthcoming in the coming months for this sort of similar sort of item?
That's correct, Deputy Mayor. You're absolutely right. This is the way in which we are proposing to deal with these minor amendments that don't require a strategic approach, which you're right, we've discussed, and there is a list that we're working through and collecting the information. So we envisage a monthly report of this nature, and we hope to wrap up the list over the next couple of months.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Castle.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I do have one question about 1.1. The 3-hour limit, can you give us some detail either now or in the briefing notes about how that fits with other parking restrictions in the Mount Hawthorn Town Centre and whether there are any other 3-hour?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, if I can take that on notice, we can certainly put that information in the briefing notes.
Councillors? No. Okay. Move on to corporate services items. 7.1 late report, investment report as at 30 September 2018. Any questions? 7.2 authorisation of expenditure for the period 22 August 2018 to 18 September 2018. No questions. 7.3 late report, financial statements as at 31 August. Late report financial statements as at 30 September. Was there anything? No, we don't have that yet. All right, we'll move on to 7.5, the late report relating to the variation of Leederville Tennis Club and North Perth Tennis Club leases to enable return of funds held in cities reserved to accounts to clubs. Any questions? I just had one. Perhaps to the Acting CEO or to the Acting Director of Community Engagement. I note the intent to undertake resurfacing works, I believe, at the North Perth Tennis Club in 2019, and just how do these sorts of works fit within the current lease arrangements?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, within the obligations of the lease, the lessee is responsible for any capital upgrades. It is at the Council's absolute discretion as to whether we fund those works or contribute towards those works.
And this resolution does not negate the need for a specific approval for the resurfacing works, or is the noting that the resurfacing works are intended to occur the only sort of involvement that the city would have in prior to those works commencing?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I will just seek some clarification during the week and include it within the briefing notes as to what level of application and or approval will be required for the court resurfacing. Given its nature, I suspect there wouldn't need to be planning approval, but I will confer with administration and get some advice in the briefing notes.
Thank you. Anything further? Item 7.6, City of Vincent statutory review of wards and representation. Any questions? Councillor Hallett.
I assume that there's no scope to take in other parts of the local area outside of our boundaries, or exclude specific bits that have large infrastructure that we want to maintain.
I will. Someone can answer that.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. We note that and no, there isn't scope to do that. Thank you.
Item 7.7, the late report relating to the reallocation of capital budget funds for the Leederville shared space. Councillor Castle.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, just a quick question for the Director of Corporate Services, what do you call it, isn't it? We're proposing here to move expenditure from, or budget from the recycling expenditure item through to this project. Can you just give us some detail on what might be lost by moving that amount? Was there anything specifically allocated in that recycling line item?
Certainly, through you, Deputy Mayor. The amount that was allocated in the original operational budget was based on the previous contract that we had in relation to that recycling contract. We subsequently gone back to market and been able to achieve much better rates than we had previously. It is still obviously to play out over the full year, but at this stage I've done sufficient analysis to confirm that there's definitely sufficient budget to cover that $150,000, and that is in compliance with our legislative and regulatory requirements to be able to use that funding for that purpose.
Thank you. Can I ask that maybe that's reflected in the report for next week? If it's not already, if I missed it.
Certainly, through you, Deputy Mayor, we'll correct that.
Thank you.
Anything further? Okay. We'll move on to community engagement. Management of 8.1, management of services at World Square for people experiencing homelessness. Do I have any questions? No. Okie dokie. We've covered item 8.2. Now we can move on to item 9.1, adoption of the Strategic Community Plan 2018 to 2028. Any questions? Any final questions? No. Okie dokie. Does anyone have any questions on item 9.2, the information bulletin? Councillor Hallett.
Just there doesn't appear to be any UMAG minutes in this one, so wondering if they'll come through at some point.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. I think the same thing happened last month, that's why I rolled my eyes, so we'll sort that out in time for Council. So apologies for that.
Anything further? No? Okay. That being that, I will close the briefing at 7:28. Thank you. Oh, wait. I will close the public briefing and we will cease web streaming at 7:28 and we will move to the confidential item.